Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know everyone has a busy schedule, so we appreciate it when you come out here and participate in these hurricane preparation events. We know from past experience that if we have an educated public who's prepared, it helps us perform our job, and it makes our overall hurricane response much more successful. So today we have a few members of the emergency management community in Lee County to speak with us here. First, we have our city's weather consultant, Dave Roberts. Then after Dave speaks, we'll have Jim Bjosted. Jim is the public safety chief for Lee County. After Jim, we'll have Maggie Goldsmith from FISH, that's the Friends in Service Here organization on the island. And after Maggie, Harold Law, our building official, will go over some flood facts and building codes. And then I'll wrap things up with some specific information about what the city does before, during, and after a storm. So with that said, Dave, would you want to come up and kick things off?
I was going to say, don't applaud just yet. You haven't heard what I have to say. Sometimes I deliver good news, sometimes I deliver bad news, but it's good to see all of you here today. They rely on me to give you the exact days and times that we're going to have hurricanes. So break out your pens and papers, and let's get this show on the road. Now, we're here to talk about hurricane season, and if you're new to Sanibel or you're maybe new to coming to one of our hurricane seminars, I've been doing these for a few years, and this is all about being prepared, not scared. Hey, hard to see. Being prepared, not scared. This is all about trying to get you ready for hurricane season and also letting you know what Sanibel does to prepare for hurricane season to ensure all of its residents stay safe. So we're going to talk about this year's hurricane season. And this is a map showing all the hurricane tracks since the 1840s across the globe. Have I missed any? Because I didn't double check my work, I'll be honest with you. Florida's in there somewhere on the right part of your screen, top part, right part of your screen. But it's just to illustrate that hurricanes are not unique to Florida, but certainly they are something that we have to deal with from time to time. Asia's another place that has to deal with hurricanes, or as they call them, typhoons and cyclones. And then if you take a look on the lower right portion of the screen, you'll see a little squiggly. And that's because there's only one storm that's ever impacted South America, believe it or not. It happened in the last few years. They never had one to deal with, but yet they had one. So I just thought I'd point that out to you. Florida does stand out when it comes to hurricane tracks. There's no doubt about it. And when can you expect to see a hurricane in Florida? Well, here's the deal. For the next couple of months, we don't really see too much activity in June and July, typically. It's usually August that things really ramp up, and then you can see in September, right after Labor Day, that's when we see the biggest concentration of hurricane activity when it comes to the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or the Gulf of Mexico. And there's been a little bit of a shift in the last few years. It used to be September 10th was not only the peak for here, but the peak for hurricane season in general. I've been noticing that our peak of hurricane activity for at least the Sanibel and Lee County area has been shifting a little bit more to the latter portion of September. The life of a hurricane. I know we'd rather talk about the death of a hurricane, but let's talk about the life of a hurricane real quick. And really it's made up of a few things. You've got warm surface air. You also have winds spinning and a circulation that gets it going into a tropical disturbance. Then you've got a tropical storm when those winds become 39 miles an hour or greater. And then you have a hurricane. And when a hurricane makes landfall, that's how it releases all of its energy. We hear about all the flooding they get in Pennsylvania sometimes, or in the Northeast, or in North Carolina from hurricanes. That's where these hurricanes are winding up. But here on Sanibel, we're not really a destination for hurricanes. They just pass by. They're going somewhere else, most likely, if they're coming over us. So what are hurricane must-haves? Well, a hurricane has to have moisture. We live in Florida. Water temperature must be 80 degrees or warmer. We live in Florida. Instability. We live in Florida. And then, of course, you have to have wind shear. Now, you don't want the wind shear to be too strong. If it's too strong, it doesn't allow the storms to develop. And a lot of times what happens is we just get the occasional showers and storms. But if the wind shear is just right, it must be below about 22 miles an hour or so. That gives you enough for development. Also, there's another ingredient we have to consider, this being a presidential election year, plenty of hot air. Practiced that last night. Thank you. All right. It's the Florida Keys in extreme southern Florida that has to deal with the worst of the hurricane activity. I don't want you to have to memorize this map, but it's just to illustrate northeast Florida, the Big Bend of Florida, those blue colors, that's where you don't tend to have much activity. In fact, I don't want to encourage you to move to Jacksonville, but Jacksonville hasn't had any real hurricanes in the last 100 years or so. So there's very few spots that are immune from hurricanes in Florida, but we certainly are not the peak area. It's the Florida Keys and Miami-Dade County. Hurricane season forecast. A new one just came out in the last 2 hours. I'll share that with you here. First off, we should know that over the course of a 60-year average, we have about 12 named storms that come out. That means tropical storms and hurricanes, not here in Sanibel. This is for all of the Atlantic, all of the Caribbean, and all of the Gulf. Out of those 12, 7 are hurricanes. And out of those hurricanes, about 3 are considered major. Latest forecast that came out from NOAA a few weeks ago was showing that we were going to be pretty much on target. And today they revised it a little bit. They pushed the numbers up just a little bit in the last couple hours. But it's still indicating a near normal hurricane season. This is still significant because the last few years, we haven't had much activity. So if you have a near normal season after having a below normal season, don't be surprised if you see or hear more storms this year. It doesn't mean that we're having a crazy season. It just means we may be back on to where we're supposed to be. And one of the other things you've heard about is El Nino. We've all heard about El Nino. We blame El Nino on everything we can, right? And El Nino means more activity in the Pacific, and because our planet tends to be in a balance, when we have more activity in the Pacific, we tend to see less activity around here, unfavorable winds, that goes back to the shear, and that's what we've enjoyed, believe it or not, during the last few years, why we haven't had that much activity. One of the big problems we have to deal with here, of course, storm surge. You know, I could talk to you all day about rainfall, and people will start yawning. Obviously, we know winds from a hurricane are dangerous, but here it's the storm surge. And when I first started doing these seminars, I don't know how many years ago, I remember people used to come up to me and they'd say, and we don't single you out, by the way, for asking questions, but I'll never forget, after explaining over and over again about the dangers of living on an island, they would come over and say, "Excuse me, where is the highest point, though, on the island?" Well, we don't want you to feel like there's some security in that. There's security in planning in advance. There's security in planning your future in advance and keeping up to date with the information and knowing when you're supposed to leave. That's really the most important thing. Winds blowing across the water tend to pile it up. When it's consistent and the storm is sitting offshore, you get a storm surge. Now, Sanibel doesn't have a history of 20-foot storm surges, okay? There are those reports that once you get farther inland, you'll find higher storm surges. But how much of a storm surge really is going to make you worry? Well, if you had 6 inches of running water come at your feet, that's enough to knock you on your side. 6 inches of running water. So don't be concerned whether it's a foot or a 3-foot or an 8-foot storm surge. It's all deadly. And please keep that in mind. We want to remind you of that. Now, the names are out, the 2016 hurricane names. I put their names on the screen there. I also put their pronunciations. The name game started about 100 years ago from a disgruntled gentleman in the Australian Navy. He had a tumultuous breakup with his significant other, and he named a storm after her. This is how it got started. Then the U.S. Navy said, hey, we want to keep our troops interested in what's going on with the weather in the Pacific in World War II, and they gave them all female names. Well, of course, that didn't go over very well with a certain segment of the society, right? So in the 1970s, we started giving both male and female names to the storms. And then in the 1980s, we started integrating international names. So we have complete fairness now across all storms. We're all equally to blame. What are the odds that Sanibel will have to deal with a problem at any given time? Well, I look back in the history books here, and I went and looked at every storm that kind of has come our way within 60 miles from the 1870s until last year. And what I found is that there's 54 storms that happened over a course of about 144 years. Seems like a lot, huh? 50% of them were hurricanes, 50% of them were tropical storms. About every 32 months, we'll get brushed by a storm. So that's about every 3 years. One direct hit almost every decade. But Nothing works out evenly. So there are gaps in which we will have 15, upwards of 40 years in between storms. We just have to realize we live in a subtropical climate and we are on the path of hurricanes. Here's one of the things that I get called upon to do quite often. The city of Sanibel knows that there's a storm out there. I'll indicate to them that we have a storm or a hurricane. My job is to not just look at the forecast models and say, hey, let's go with the one on the right. It doesn't work that way, because this is almost like going to the horse track at times. All right, and you can see that we have lots of different tracks to look at there. But what I look at is I'll look at the history. I'll look at the history of our climate. I'll look at the history of these storms, and I'll sit down and I'll look at, sometimes I'll say, hey, none of these hurricane tracks are good. Don't pay attention to any of them. We had a storm last year. I can't remember the name now, but it was coming toward us, and we had all the forecast models pointing toward us, and I was explaining, stop, I was telling everybody, stop looking at the models, because it was coming right for us. But the thing you had to understand, it was crossing Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And the next day, the storm completely disappeared. And of course, a lot of people said, I thought I saw that it was coming right for us. So forecast models are not everything. My job is to really get specific with the city of Sanibel and explaining the risk from each storm that is threatening the area. So what can we count on? We can count on hurricane season every year, from June 1st until November 30th. That's unless the Sanibel City Council decides to pass an ordinance. No, I'm just kidding. But that is the season that we go by, June 1st through November 30th, a 6-month window in which you can get tropical storms or hurricanes. By the way, Mother Nature doesn't always pay attention to this calendar. She will sometimes send storms to us in advance. We're already watching a system right now that's just east of the Bahamas that could become something at any time. The hurricane hunters out there checking it out. So understand that this is just the time period in which we have heightened awareness. But again, we want you to stay aware and up to date with the information at all times. I'm hoping for a quiet season. Okay, my favorite day of hurricane season is November 30th. I can't wait for it to get here. Thank you for listening to me. I'm going to turn it back over now to the lieutenant.
Thank you, Dave. Dave does an excellent job for us. We're happy to have him as a partner in our emergency management community. And our next speaker is basically what you would describe as the city's as big brother, or the next agency higher up in the organization, and that's Lee County. Jim, as I had said before, is the Chief of Emergency Management for Lee County, and he is also a Sanibel resident, so he can bring a unique perspective to his role with Lee County, as well as being a citizen here. Jim?
I know Bill's not going to get too far away, because when you give me instructions on how to operate anything electronic. Oh, okay. Okay, so the space bar will move it forward. All right, well, that would be me. I'm glad we cleared that up. So who's afraid of hurricanes? Okay, so the best thing I can tell you today, I hope it makes you happy, there's absolutely no reason to be afraid of hurricanes. Now, who's ever lived in Oklahoma, Kansas, places like that? What do you worry about when you're there? Tornadoes. How much notice do you get for a tornado? 3 to 5 minutes if you're lucky. There's an old saying, if you hear a freight train coming down the street in front of your house and there's no tracks there, that would be a tornado. So you head for the cellar. If you can't get to the cellar, you head for the bathtub. And you pray and hope the house doesn't collapse around you. 3 to 5 minutes. Hurricanes, I'm giving you 3 to 5 days, sometimes 7 days notice. I'm telling you 3 to 5 days out whether or not you need to think about evacuating. And I'm assuming everybody here is either from or spends a lot of time in Sanibel like I do. So usually at this point I have everybody open their all-hazard guide to the centerfold and find their home in Lee County so they can see what hazard zone they're in. You do not need to do that. We're all in A. The first people evacuated would be Zone A. So that part of the test is going to be really easy. I will give you a phrase that I want you all to remember. I made this up 2 years ago and I kind of like it. It is, respect the wind, fear the surge. Because the wind will hurt you, the surge will kill you if the surge is higher than you are. If Hurricane Katrina came ashore across Sanibel, every structure in Sanibel would be underwater except the 3rd and 4th story of a handful of condos. Underwater, over the roof. Now, is that likely? Well, no, it's never happened in 160 some years. Is it possible? A little bit. It's also possible you win the Powerball, okay? So I want you to keep in mind you don't need to be afraid to live here. I'm a hurricane guy. I chose to come and live in what is a very vulnerable place. Why? Because I know I get 3 to 5 days to get out of town if a hurricane comes. Now, when we ask you to evacuate, why do we ask you to evacuate? So that would be a floor joist, 20 feet in the air going through a royal palm. What do you think that's going to do to your house? If you have hurricane glass, it'll probably slow it down. If you have a CBS house, it'll probably put a dent in it. What if you have regular siding on your house? What if something like that, what if you're in your car, for example, because you finally decided to leave, and that comes flying through your windshield? There's things flying around when you have hurricanes. So it's not just the surge that I worry about. The surge is bad enough, but even if we're not predicting a big surge, we're predicting a lot of wind, you have to wonder what's flying around out there. You also have to worry about what I call the flying buzzsaw. That would be a sheet of plywood that has just spun through another royal palm. Imagine the damage that that can do to a person that's outside or to your home, unless it's a really, really strong home. Many of them in Sanibel are, not all of them. We also have to worry about, in addition to the hurricane winds and the surge, we have to worry about the rain because it rains a lot. Big, slow-moving storms dump a lot of rain, and the rain piles up on top of the surge. And so that makes it even more challenging to get people out that chose to stay. This would be Hurricane Ike in Galveston, 2008, and as you can see on the coastline there, on the left-hand side, you can see there's lots of houses there, and on the right side, there's only one left. And oh, by the way, they had to tear it down. It was structurally unstable. It just happened to not completely fall apart. That's what happens when you get a major storm surge. Some of my neighbors are here. I think I saw Bill's here and Dan's here. They know that I was in the Coast Guard for 29 years. I was the incident commander for Hurricane Katrina in Mississippi. A lot of people think about Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Actually, New Orleans got hit by that big flood from all the rain that filled up Lake Pontchartrain and caused the levees to fail. The storm surge was on the right side of the storm as it came ashore at the Louisiana-Mississippi state line. And this is what happened to the coast of Gulfport. What you see at the bottom is a sandy beach and the coastal road, and then you see a bunch of gray things that look like parking lots. All that gray stuff is foundations of homes that are no longer there. Right above the gray, you'll see a layer of light tan, looks like mulch. That's what's left of all the houses it used to be where the gray foundations are. And then up top, you'll see there's a few structures with blue tarps. They were all underwater. But the people, when they came back, they decided even though the roof was torn up, it was a CBS house, they thought it was salvageable and they put a tarp on it. The point is that if you look at that and then you think about where most of the folks live in Sanibel, this is not a good place to be if we order an evacuation and there's a big surge. That was my Coast Guard station in Gulfport, Mississippi. At the top you see the Coast Guard station. The roof looks pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, the roof's in pretty good shape. It was built to handle 155 mile an hour winds and well, that's about 80% intact. Then you see the rest of the station, and no, it wasn't under construction. The rest of the station was completely washed away. Good news, bad news. The bad news is the station mascot, a dog, three-legged dog, was on the second floor. That's the bad news. The good news is it showed up a week later. We have no idea how it survived. There was over 30 feet of water, and somehow this dog survived. But the point is, this is an almost new building that was built to the current standards for hurricanes. You can't build to surge. And this is another shot of Gulfport, Mississippi. Same sort of thing, it's just a reverse shot, but you can see how far from the water, you can see where all that stuff that looks like mulch, that's the remains of houses piled up. This is the ground zero, Bay St. Louis. This is the town of Bay St. Louis, and you can see the shops and the restaurants and the bank and the movie theater, right? You can't see anything, it all washed away. It was all destroyed, including the 4-lane highway that crossed the bay. And this is a really nice community in Bay St. Louis. It's actually a little farther inland, about 3 or 4 miles inland, and all the white stuff you see is driveways and foundations, and all the pilings you see are very well concrete reinforced, steel reinforced concrete pilings for 2-story high-end houses. The entire community was washed away. All those houses, hundreds of houses in this community were washed away. Even the older houses that were very solidly built, nothing was left but the stairs. So I don't want to oversell surge, but if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, and you'll see a guy standing there next to a tree, he's 6 feet tall. And then if you go up the tree where the white turns back into bark, that's how high the water was when it crossed the Sanibel of Mississippi. Even older buildings have to worry about storm surge. This would be the Richelieu Apartments. This was Camille many years ago, but that was the next day. Bad news if somebody decided to stay. So this is a presentation I give to a lot of folks. Know your zone. We all know our zone now. What's our zone? Thank you. I've had people actually argue with me. Well, no, I think I'm in Zone B. You know the difference between Zone A and Zone B across the street? Yeah. So who's heard about Charley hung a right? And Charley came in 2004, and at the last minute hung a right and came into Punta Gorda. So this is Charley, and pay close attention to this slide. At the bottom of the screen, you see an orange dot. That's where Charley was at 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Remember Charley showed up 3 o'clock Friday afternoon? Look at the black line where they were predicting Charley was going to go. Where was Charley going to make landfall as of 11 o'clock Wednesday morning? That would be Naples. Naples. And then the next day, Thursday, they said, oh, it's going to Tampa. And then Friday morning at dawn, actually before dawn, I think Jim Farrell was the first to notice at 4 in the morning. He said, oh my God, it's coming into Punta Gorda. The thing is, Charley was a wake-up call for all of us in the hurricane business to remind folks, don't fixate on that black line. The hurricane does not follow the track line like you follow the road map when you're driving somewhere. What you have to pay attention to is what I call the cone of uncertainty. If you're in that cone, then you're vulnerable. So when you're looking at the weather, and it's 3 or 4 or 5 days before a hurricane, if Sanibel's in the cone, you need to pay attention, because hurricanes do shift left and right as much as 100 miles in the last couple of days. To be ready, I want you to have a plan. All of the information I'm giving you, you don't have to write it down, you don't have to pay a lot of attention. It's in your all hazards guide, it's on my website. The main thing is to have a plan where you think now about what you're going to do when an evacuation is ordered. So should an evacuation be ordered, you don't saying, where did I put that book Jim gave me? It's around here somewhere, I can't find it. No, you're ready to go. And when we say it's time to go, that's not the time to pack the car. That's not the time to get all the food and the water and the medicine and the dog and the important papers. When you're in the cone and we're 3 or 4 days out, you need to start thinking about, I'm packing a car. I'm getting everything set in the living room to put in the car so I'm ready to go as soon as the evacuation is ordered. Why do you want to get out of town right away? Because what's between you and Interstate 75, and oh, by the way, for 95% of you, Interstate 75 is how you evacuate. Get to 75, head north or you head east, depending on where the storm's going, where we're predicting the storm's going to go. Between you and Interstate 75 is 500,000 people. You want to get to 75 before they go, oh, perhaps it's time to evacuate. You also want to make sure that you fill your car up with gas the next time you drive it and never let it go below a half a tank. So when it's time to evacuate, you're not sitting in line with 400 other people at the gas pump. You're on your way out of town because you got enough gas to get to the gas station that's an hour or 2 away. If you decide to stay, if we happen to have a storm that is not going to have surge, not a real big storm, you decide, okay, it's safe to stay, so I won't have to go to the gas station because I don't have to evacuate. We're going to lose power, and it's going to be hot, and it's going to be muggy, and if that car's half full, car tank of gas is half full, you go out, you fire up the engine, you now have air conditioning, you now have a radio, you now have a place to charge your cell phone. And I've had people thank me because I told them that. But I do want you to have a plan, and you can get all the information you want on my website. You should have a disaster supply kit. I tell people on the mainland that they should have at least 3 days of food and water and medicine. In Sanibel, you need at least 5 to 7 because it might take a little while longer for us to get to you. You want to think about all the things that you would like to have if you're marooned in your house for 5 to 7 days and have them in your house before hurricane season starts or as soon thereafter as possible. Stay informed. You are going to be inundated by information from the media. They will be on the air 24 hours around the clock. They'll be cutting in. They'll give you the latest forecasts. They'll be telling you everything you need to know. So pay attention to them. If you're really into things like social media and so on, whatever it takes for you to get informed, being informed is what's going to make it a whole lot easier for you to get through and survive and not be too uncomfortable. Code Red is kind of cool. It's an app you can go and you can download it onto your smartphone. What Code Red allows me to do is to give you notification of not just things like hurricanes, but other bad things that might occur, like tornadoes, like big mulch fires. Let's say we had a big fire going on right at the end of dry season, like, maybe right now, out in one of the preserves. If you have Code Red, I can send, and of course I do this in concert with my city folks, but Pine Island's another example that I have to take care of. I can send a message out to every smartphone and every residence in any area that I want to, and instantaneously I can notify hundreds, if not thousands of people of what's going on. It also works if you're somewhere else and something bad is happening there. If you have Code Red on your smartphone and you're in Charleston and there's an earthquake, you're going to get the notification. Now, what do you do when you evacuate? If you can stay home, it's good to stay home if you can, because evacuating is very inconvenient. And every storm's different, as long as you're ready to not have power for a few days, or water, lift stations for most of Sanibel, so the toilets don't work after a while. But if you're tough and you're rugged and you really want to stay and you're going to be safe, okay. If you're going to leave, which is usually a good idea, the best place to stay is with a friend or relative somewhere not here. And that's because it's very convenient and it's free and it's comfortable, and then they'll want you to pay them back when they want to come over here and visit. Go to a hotel or motel, preferably not in Lee County, because they're all going to be full, and in the early hours, or the early days, we're not going to know how much of the impact is going to be in Lee County. So hotels and motels here may not be a good option. It might be better to get a little farther inland. If all else fails, I do have shelters. I do open them. They're different for every storm. Most of them are middle schools, high schools. If you go to a shelter, and we'll tell you where they are, when we order evacuation from A, we'll tell you what shelters are open. We have general population shelters, we have special needs shelters. And in your all hazards guides and on my website is some information on how you can sign up for the special needs program. This is if you have a condition where you're not going to be properly cared for in a general shelter, in a high school auditorium. This is where you may need oxygen, you may have equipment that you need to be comfortable or to survive that plugs in, like CPAP machines. You may have a condition that requires that you can't be in unair conditioned spaces. So we have a place for you. We do register you in advance. It is HIPAA certified and HIPAA compliant if you're concerned about that. We have a doctor that determines whether or not you qualify, and then you go on our list. And 5 days before a storm, if a storm's heading this way, you get a phone call to find out if you're going to need to go to the shelter and if you have transportation. If you don't, we come get you. We send either a Lee-Tran paratransit or we send an ambulance. And we take you to the shelter where we have paramedics to take care of you and so on. Now, the emergency shelter program, the general public shelter and pet shelters, the only pet shelter today is South Fort Myers High School, which I will almost always open. All you need to do is bring your pet, have a crate, bring their food and medicine, bring their rabies certificate if you can find it, that's helpful. Bring a leash, because I need you to walk them. But at least you have no excuse to stay here, because the biggest excuse for not evacuating is, I'm not leaving my pet. I just wiped that one out. Bring your pet. You got a 100-pound dog? Bring your dog. Just big crate, but that's okay. I want you to evacuate. Again, the special needs shelter's available. The hospital shelter, we actually put some folks into the hospitals. They're not admitted. They're in the hallway, preferably with a caregiver, a family member or whatever, because we want those folks that are that frail to be much closer to immediate care than just paramedics can provide in the special needs shelter. And again, transportation. It doesn't really apply for Sanibel. Virtually everybody here has a car or can get one. But just so you know, anywhere in Lee County, if you can get to a bus, you can get to a shelter. I can get 500,000 people to shelters on the Lee-Tran buses, because I stopped charging fees for Lee-Tran buses, and you can bring your pets on board if they're in a crate, and you can get the crate on board. Again, if you have a 100-pound dog trying to get on a bus, probably not a great idea. Most people have pets and crates that they can get on a bus if they need to. South Fort Myers is my pet-friendly shelter. Yes, you need to stay. You can't drop your dog off and go to Orlando. Some people have asked me that. That'd be mighty convenient, but no, we can't do that. I have a staff of 10, okay? How many people live in Lee County? 660,000. Do the math, okay. Microchipping. So people say, what's microchipping? Do I need a microchip for my pet? Does it cost a lot of money? What do I do? Why should I take a chance on having a microchip and so on? Well, during disasters, 1 in 3 pets will disappear. Remember dogs and cats, you're kind of frantic getting stuff into the car. You open the door, you close the door, you're taking stuff to the car. The dog gets out, the cat gets out. Anybody ever tried to catch a cat that doesn't want to get caught? The storm will be gone before you find that cat. 1 in 3 are lost. And if they don't have an ID, like a tag on a collar, and by the way, collars do come off, as many of you know, 90% of them will not be reunited with you. Now, I don't know about you, but my daughter's dog, that I'm grandpa, my camp grandpa for my daughter's dog, probably a third of the year, she's a little terror, but I don't want anything to happen to her. And I want to have her to be returned should she get away. So, get microchipped. You can get it done at most vets. You can go down to Animal Services in Fort Myers between 9 and 1, Monday through Friday, $10. They put the microchip in. It's the size of a grain of rice. It's injected below the skin between the shoulder blades, and that way we will be able to return your pet to you after the storm. Okay, before the storm, you want to be ready. You want to clear your yard of debris, board up the windows, put your shutters up. If you want to get 4 or 5 rolls of tape and tape all your windows, knock yourselves out. It does absolutely no good. Get some cash as much as you can. It's not a bad idea to have hundreds, if not $1,000 in cash, because ATMs are going to be empty or not working or both. Turn your refrigerator to the coldest setting. You know, after Katrina, I came back to my house in Spanish Fort, Alabama, and I drove through from my command post out at the airport, and every light in Mobile, Alabama was out. There was no power anywhere in Mobile, Alabama, except under generator power. I got across the causeway to my house, which is just across the bay from Mobile, pulled up in front of my house, the power's on. My whole neighborhood was on, had lights on, because we were on a trunk that was coming down from the north, and we were the last neighborhood that wasn't impacted. So I didn't have to dump my refrigerator. Does everybody know what it means to dump your refrigerator? It's not only is it a nuisance, in fact, a lot of times the refrigerator has to go too, if it's been 4 or 5 days. If you turn your refrigerator to the coldest setting and the power only goes out for 6 or 8 or 12 hours or even 24, it's very possible your food will not spoil. And it's a good idea to shut off your water. It's not a bad idea to shut off your propane tank. This is just to make sure that bad things don't happen to your house. After the storm, help will come. It's going to take us a while to get to you. I know everybody's going to be working hard to get to you, but you need to understand you may not have water, you may not have sewer, you may not have cell phones, and you're not going to be very comfortable. Things will be contaminated. You've already heard about avoiding the surge. There will be a lot of angry critters. Does anybody know what snake chaps are? Snake chaps are these neat things that you put on like cowboys wear the leather chaps to protect their pants from the horse. Snake chaps are what you wear around when you're in places like Sanibel after a hurricane, because the snakes are all out there and they're mad and they're snapping at anything. We learned about this in Mississippi. The point is that the alligators will be very unhappy, and they will be wandering around, and if they see you, it's your fault. We will try to set up a point of distribution out here as soon as we can. That's where we'll have food, water, ice, and stuff. We'll get the power back on as soon as it's possible. It takes a while. We do it neighborhood by neighborhood, island by island. The good news is that our main power comes across, I think, in just one main line. If that's not damaged or if they're able to restore it, LCEC does a pretty good job, I think, of keeping our power up. But it's going to take a while. And there's no hospitals on Sanibel, and hospitals get power first. So our priority here, it might not be the highest. If you have a generator, please do not run your generator on your lanai. Do not run your generator in your garage. Do not run your generator in your living room. I have seen this. Generators produce carbon monoxide gas. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless, and it kills you by you go to sleep and you don't wake up. So if you have a generator and you've got it outside, of course all the windows are open because that's the only air conditioning you have is whatever little bit of breeze comes through. Make sure you have a CO2 detector, carbon monoxide detector, with a fresh battery next to your head where you're sleeping, so that should carbon monoxide, which is a heavy gas, kind of come creeping through the window and start to fill the room up that you're in, that you can wake up and get out of the room and survive. Also, I don't know if Harold's going to talk about this, but I'll mention it briefly. If you have a generator and it's connected to your house wiring, be sure it was done by a qualified, licensed electrical contractor. Not Cousin Fred, not Jim, because he's done it before. You want it to be properly installed, Because if it's not, you are putting current not only into your house wiring, but it's also backflowing into the lines overhead, where some kid from Georgia in a bucket truck that came down here as mutual aid to try to get your power back on thinks he's working after an 18-hour day on a dead line, and he gets electrocuted, shocked, either shocked or killed, because your generator's pouring power into the line, not only to your house, but backflowing into the electrical lines. It's also a fire hazard if you don't do it right. So if you have a generator, please be really careful. We're going to answer questions at the end? Okay. I will be here for all your questions afterwards, as we all will. There's two kinds of questions. Questions you'll ask us in front of everybody, and questions that you think are too dumb to ask except personally. There are no dumb questions. I will still stay here until the last one has every question answered, because I want you to be informed, I want you to be prepared, I want you to survive, and I want you to do it in a comfortable fashion. Thank you.
Speak to you today is Maggie Goldsmith from FISH. And Maggie is going to be explaining the program that they have to help folks with special needs. And we'd like to take this opportunity to ask you to just consider neighbors, maybe folks you go to church with who might be in the category of needing some extra assistance, and keep it in mind, check with them, maybe see if they could sign up for this program. And then we would be able to help them ahead of time or earlier in a storm. So, Maggie, could you come on up? That's your first one. Just that over there.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Maggie Goldsmith. I am the Director of Operations with FISH of Sandcap. We are a human services agency here on the island. We've been here for over 30 years, and our mission is to help lend a helping hand to anyone that lives, works, or visits here. We have over 30 different programs, and the program that we're discussing today, of course, is our Hurricane Preparedness program. We've been doing this program for probably 15 or more years, and anyone is welcome to get a packet of information. We have a very valuable resource packet that we've been compiling since probably January, with all the lists of hotels and shelters and checklists of what you need to put within your hurricane supply kit, and also a detailed medication list, anything you may need in the event that you have to evacuate. We also reach out to the community in hopes of gathering information for those that may need a little extra assistance. For instance, those that may be requiring oxygen, or those that have special electrical equipment that they would need, where if you were out of power at, let's say, a hotel, and your hotel didn't have a generator, you would be out of luck. So what we would like to offer to anyone here is to please visit Sharon in the back, or Joy. They are my co-workers and co-chair of this program. And you're welcome to take a packet. But if you have anyone that you know of that you might live next to, or a friend of a friend, or a neighbor of a neighbor, that may be a little extra vulnerable and might need some extra assistance, we would love to reach out to them and send a volunteer out to their home with their permission to go over what their plan is and who their contact people are, so that in the event that we do have to evacuate, everyone is aware of their situation and can kind of help them before the fact get to where they need to go. We cannot transport you off the island, but we could perhaps connect you with someone that could help. And then most importantly, we will stay in touch with that individual's family. If their family is not in Lee County, if they're up north or out west or wherever they are, we will reach out to their family and let them know that your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, whomever it is safe, and that they've evacuated, they've gone to a particular hotel or shelter, and we will also stay with them throughout the entire process by phone or text, and let them know when that loved one gets back on the island. So we really want to make sure that our neighbors are safe and have all the information that they need to stay that way throughout the whole process. So if you'd like afterwards, please visit with Sharon or Joy, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer and help. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Next up is Harold Law. Harold is our building official. He will talk to you about the importance of hiring licensed contractors, as well as a number of important flood information facts.
Okay. Thank you very much. As you know, Sanibel is one of the most leading building codes enforcement in Southwest Florida. We're quite tough on making sure that your homes are built to withstand the hurricanes and the floods that are coming. And so therefore, we promote qualified people to do the work for you. That's why we contract or do construction and contractor licensing with the city, not only the state. Secondly, I'm here to talk about what's all near and dear to us. As you know, everyone here lives in a flood zone. There are no properties on the island that's not in a flood zone. And FEMA becomes involved. Therefore, they have many standards in which we have to build our homes to in order that the city can receive flood insurance. If you have a mortgage today, you are required to have flood insurance. Many people on the island do not have a mortgage and think that they don't have to follow the rules of FEMA, but guess what? You do. Someday you may want to sell that house and they will have mortgage. If you're in, like we said, you've got to have your flood insurance. I recommend it just as a good precaution, even if you don't need it. The only time we will flood on the island is when we do have a hurricane. And in order to get flood insurance for your home, you have to have it 30 days before the hurricane hits. So therefore, it's kind of hard to get it at the last minute. As you know, when we do ask you to evacuate, that means that most of the roads will be impassable. So get off the island early, go visit your cousins or your friends somewhere else and enjoy it. And after the storm, we will tell you about your home. One of the jobs of the building department, besides building your homes in good shape, after the storm, we're responsible for teams that come onto the island right after the hurricane that evaluate all the structures on the island, give a written report to FEMA of all the damage that is on the island, if there is any. We've come, after Charley, it took us 2.5 days to look at all the houses and units on the island. After Wilma, it took us about 3 hours because there wasn't much damage. But we're in charge of that, and we do it before it's almost passable on the island. We had a hard time with, if you remember, if Charley had a lot of trees down, couldn't hardly get around, but our team still made it quite well at that time. Everybody, we talk about the BFE with FEMA. BFE stands for base flood elevation. That's the minimum height in which your house should be at. There are houses on the island that were built before the BFE was established, and those are grandfathered in. You see a lot of the what we call Michigan homes that are right on the ground. Those are all grandfathered in. They can still get flood insurance at this time, but that might be questionable in the future. FEMA's talking. As this talks about erosion and streams, we only have the Sanibel River on our island. We're one of the lucky barrier islands that actually has a flowing river on it. Most of the area around the river is protected by wildlife areas, so therefore we watch it very close for silt and damage to it. All construction sites before they're started have to have silt protection to keep the erosion from happening. One of the big things we have is we got sand and it erodes pretty quick, but we don't have many hills, so therefore the erosion doesn't go far, so we can usually maintain it very close to the construction site. So And with that, I'm finished. Is that okay?
I'm not sure if I introduced myself in the beginning, but my name's William Dalton. I'm a lieutenant with the police department here in Sanibel. Last week, I started my 23rd year with the city. So I can say that I either had the fortune or the misfortune of being here when Hurricane Charley struck. So this portion of the seminar will talk very specifically about what Sanibel does, like, as I had mentioned before, during, and after a storm. Before a storm, the efforts we put forth is we refer to it as either preparation or mitigation. Evacuation is basically when we try to just run away from the storm. After the storm passes, we do our re-entry, and then what we call recovery is our long-term efforts. So in hurricane preparation, I like to have some audience participation at this point, and I ask, why do we plan? Does anybody have an idea why we would plan for a hurricane? Save lives. Someone has probably been here before. The number one reason why we plan, we go through all this effort, all the professionals in the room and everything, is just simply that, to save lives. And in saving lives here on Sanibel, because we're a barrier island, we are going to need to evacuate. The next slide. This lists the 5 most difficult places in the country to evacuate from, according to a consultant at the 2012 Hurricane Conference. The 5th worst place of all is Southeast Florida. That is the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. The 4th is the New York City, New Jersey area, the coast area there, and that proved to be true during Superstorm Sandy. Next is the Delmarva Peninsula, mainly because it is a peninsula that sticks out into the Atlantic. The next after that is Tampa Bay. The Tampa Bay area has a lot of interstate roadways to move people, but the population is so great that the population would easily inundate the roadways. Then the worst place to evacuate from in the whole country is Southwest Florida. In the last 20 years, our population has either tripled or quadrupled, and we put one more lane on Interstate 75. And we have no east to west evacuation route that is an interstate until you get about 40 miles south of us, where I-75 turns and heads across the state. So when we issue the evacuation warning, we do so with good cause, and we implore the people, the citizens, to comply with that order. This is Hurricane Charley. As you can see, it basically passes right over us. This is Upper Captiva. The slide on the left shows the island intact. The slide on the right shows where the eye wall of Charley went through and cut a pass through the island. This is some of the damage that we received here on the island. We know we had winds of up to 143 miles an hour. That's when some of the wind gauges broke. You can see the vegetation down on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the vegetation, that shot there is across periwinkle. This shot here shows the concrete power poles, and I point them out in this slide because they're rated to take 200-mile-an-hour winds. There's one that snapped and one down in front of it. This next slide shows the lift stations, and there's a generator in front of the lift station. Once we lose power, we lose the lift stations, and eventually we lose our sewer. This is just some of the damage. That's the Moon Shadows condominium, or the Moon Shadows complex on Middle Gulf Drive. That's the rear of that complex, so you can see the extensive damage done there. This is not what we would consider a timely evacuation. This is why we ask everyone to evacuate early. We try to remind people that although all hurricanes contain similar hazards, that no 2 storms are alike. The storm on the left in this slide is Hurricane Floyd, and as you can see, it's about the size of the state of Florida. The storm on the right-hand side is Hurricane Andrew. And I show these because Hurricane Charley was a small Category 3 storm. It got to the Category 3, Category 4 level. And the National Weather Service estimates if it was the size of an average Category 3 storm, it would have pushed a storm surge 17 foot high over Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, and Captiva. And if that would have happened, we would have had significantly more damage than we did. This next slide shows the damage from about a 15-foot storm surge that hit the coast of right where Louisiana and Texas meet. And as you can see, a 15-foot surge, it practically scrubbed that island clean. The next slide is a video of Charley from Punta Gorda. Now, it was worse in Punta Gorda than here, but not considerably worse. And why anyone would want to stay through this is beyond me. You'll see a lot of debris flying through the air, and then in a minute you'll see a large section of roof come down the roadway. And you got to remember, when that roof comes off, there's probably 5,000 nails flying through the air at about 125 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour. In a second or so, you see a whole roof come off. It's a good video just to see the destructive force of a storm. And as I said, that was in Punta Gorda, which is a little north of us, and got it a little worse, but it was pretty bad here as well. This is what we don't want to have. We don't want to have people picking through debris fields looking for something that they probably have an emotional attachment to. People get hurt every year after a storm doing things such as that. We don't want people walking around through flooded streets because of contamination. The third picture up there is more of an urban area. We wouldn't have to worry about a rescue by helicopter with large amounts of people from apartment buildings and stuff like that. These are the important lessons that we learned from 2004. All city employees must be prepared to work out of their regularly assigned duties. We do a door-to-door post-evacuation check, and after the mandatory evacuation order is issued, we send a team out to go door-to-door. We do that because after we ordered the evacuation for Charley, we found an older couple on the west end of the island, and they were basically what you used to refer to as shut-ins. One had Alzheimer's and the other had advanced diabetes, and they had no idea that a storm was coming. They had the TV off, and if they would have lived through the storm itself, it would have been very difficult for them to survive the next 2 to 3 weeks it took to get power back. So we got them over into Lee County, got them into a special needs facility, and it's a good chance that we actually saved their lives. So that's why we go through the trouble of doing the post-evacuation door-to-door check. We know that the residents and the business owners of Sanibel, they want specific information about what happened to their community, what happened to their neighborhoods, and what happened to their house. We know that the better homes and businesses are prepared for an evacuation, the more successful our job will be. Sanibel has a hurricane plan. If this were like a Hurricane 101 course, we would explain that 5 days prior to expected landfall, a day-by-day timeline is activated. Each employee is responsible for complying with the timeline. We commence monitoring each employee has to commence monitoring all city updates hour by hour. When we're in the 5-day cone, employees have to start preparing their own property. We have encouraged them to secure all loose items, install hurricane shutters if possible, secure enough water for your family. That's 1 gallon of water per day per person. It's recommended to have enough supplies to stay at home for up to 7 days. If you're going to evacuate your family from the area, and the 5 days out is the time to do so. Other preparations at home, as mentioned before, we need to obtain cash because ATMs won't work. We encourage you to have flashlights with multiple sets of batteries, or recharging, but if the power's out, it's necessary to have the extra batteries. 3 meals a day per family member. These things can be obtained now online or at Bass Pro Shops or Dick's or anything like that. If you need glasses, or if you wear glasses, make sure you have your glasses or extras. And if you have medications, make sure you're stocked up on your medications. Preparation at work. Each city employee has, or each city department has a specific plan for their employees. Essential employees have to come to work, or have to be prepared to come to work with a bag of personal items such as sleeping bag, pillow, toiletries, prescription medications. We have to be ready to stay for 3 days. All city employees are subject to a reassignment in a state of emergency. Non-essential employees must establish communication with their supervisors and be prepared to return to work. We encourage all individuals and employees to have a family hurricane plan. As Jim had mentioned before, the Lee County E.O.C. has a family hurricane plan online. This is a copy of the front page of it. You can access it at leeeoc.com. This is just some of the checklists that are on that family hurricane plan. This is some further tools and useful items on the checklist. This is the Lee County Emergency Operations Center where Jim works. As I had said, they're basically the next level up in the chain of command in emergency management in our community. After Hurricane Charley, we had police officers and firefighters come from all over the state to help us put the community back together. And if we want to seek reimbursement for all the people and all the material and equipment that we use to put the city back together, we have to order all that through the EOC. This next slide here, that chair right up there, that's our one chair in the EOC right there. There's 105 chairs in the EOC, or roughly 105 chairs in the EOC, and that's where we would have a person stationed to help us channel all of our orders. It goes from the local level where we're at to the county to the state and then on to FEMA. And that's what it looks like when we have either an exercise or when the room is full, so you can imagine it'd be a busy place. The city has a hurricane action plan. That's an incremental timeline for preparedness leading up to the impact of a storm. Each department is responsible for certain preparedness elements leading up to the storm. This is just an example of that timeline. It starts from 3 days out and winds down to 0. This is a copy of our city's organization chart under normal conditions. It has the city council, the city manager, and the city attorney, and then the various different departments. And this is us under an emergency mobilization. This portion of the org chart right here, this portion doesn't exist in day-to-day operations because that's our temporary city hall. We move the entire city hall over to the bell tower at the Crown Plaza at the bell tower, and we continue our governing operations 24 hours a day there. The police department specifically, we maintain and facilitate the hurricane action plan. We maintain professional contacts and relationships with the emergency management community, as I had mentioned, Lee County. We improve the city's preparedness and safety through strategic planning and education. I have to develop a 1-year, 3-year, and 5-year plan for our emergency management and update it every year. And then this is an example of education when we come out and educate the public on the dangers. Our community notifications. We issue weather alerts. We keep the community informed of the storm status and the advice that we get from Dave Roberts. We issue alerts through the city's Facebook page. We will activate the city's Twitter account. Code Red that Jim had mentioned before will be utilized also. We have a partners meeting. That'll be 2 weeks from today. Every year, right before or right in the beginning of hurricane season, we have a meeting with all the partners who would help us put the island back together in the event that we get hit by a storm. An example of some of the people or some of the agencies represented in that partners meeting are the Lee County Sheriff's Office, Sanibel Fire and Rescue, Lee County Electric Co-op, the Lee County E.O.C. will be there, and then numerous others. This is the actual evacuation of the city. This is what we did during Hurricane Charley. Our plans are activated when we're in the 5-day cone. On the left-hand side, what you see is our police dispatchers, and they're over in Fort Myers. It was the Holiday Inn at the bell tower at that time, and they're actually taking calls as if they were in our dispatch center. On the right-hand side is, well, it was Mayor Harity at the time. That's Marty Harity. He's a councilman now. He's talking with citizens about just some of the issues that were going on. And city activities while evacuated. At the top picture is the city manager hosting a meeting at the Holiday Inn. And we have to still perform all the governing functions that we do on a normal basis. We have community meetings. We have media briefings. We license contractors, issue hurricane passes. We have real-time web postings of damage when the infrastructure is back up to do that. And we actually had bulletin boards where we just posted photos of damage in the first day or two after the storm because the power wasn't back and the phone lines weren't back up. We could not access the internet. This is a sign that a lot of people never believed would be in existence. but this was on the causeway, or actually this was on Summerlin just before you would get to the causeway when we had the island blocked off. These are some of our reentry activities. Our initial reentry is made by police, fire, and public works. Our citizen safety, protection of property, and clearing the roadways are our initial priorities. Restoration of services such as electric, water, and sewer soon follow. These are pictures of right outside the toll booth. It was 5 days after Hurricane Charley hit when we were finally able to get the roads cleared enough to start letting folks come back on. Our island is divided into 10 zones. Reentry of the public will depend on which zones are affected or inaccessible due to recovery efforts. The reentry hang tag program assists us in security and in organized reentry. Why are hang tags important? Our hurricane hang tags, they maximize security measures while providing authorized persons access to a property. Hurricane hang tags expedite your return to Sanibel or Captiva. Hang tags assist us in a phased reentry back onto Sanibel and Captiva. These are the 2016 hang tags. On the left is the residential, on the right is the commercial. Once we re-enter the island after a storm, one of the first things we do is set up a command post, and police and fire personnel have to search every building on the island. As our recovery efforts move on, vegetation removal, as you can see in the top photo, and then restoration of services is our next step. We try to return to normal as soon as possible. The bottom photo is in Bailey's parking lot, and the sewer was out in large areas of the island, so we have about 30 or 40 portalets there. This is our continued recovery efforts. That's Periwinkle Way, just west of the community church. As you can see, the picture on the left-hand side, it shows the roadway completely blocked, and the picture on the right-hand side, it gives you a scope, or it's a scale almost, to say you can see those two tree trimmers standing actually on the downed trees, how massive those trees were. It took us, I think, about 3 to 5 days to get that section clear. In this picture, you can see on the left-hand side, that's the same area after it's finally cleared. And then we have problems within the overall recovery. This is a tree that was damaged and had to be taken down. It fell into the Beachview Golf Course. And on the next slide, I'll use the clicker to show you. Right there, that's a person's feet. There was a man trapped underneath that tree, so we had to halt all of our recovery operations and get him out from under the tree. As I said before, we had help from all over. Our island security, we had to continue to provide police coverage 24 hours a day while recovery activities were underway. The city police force was assisted by federal, state, county, and other municipal law enforcement agencies. As you can see there's a National Guardsman that was assisting us. So that'll conclude this portion of the seminar at this time. And in closing, what I always say to folks is, now's the time to make your family hurricane plan. And if we issue an evacuation, we need you to please heed the evacuation warning, obtain your reentry pass, and let's all hope that we have a quiet hurricane season. So we'll open the field up for questions, and in just a minute I'll get some microphones that we can circulate through the crowd, and our emergency management partners will stay, and we'll get you some microphones for some questions. Ma'am?
A significant part of recovery after any hurricane is going to be getting back on the island. One of the big components in that equation that no one has spoken to is the sturdiness and drivability of the causeway. You have not indicated who's responsible, should there be damage, how that would be addressed, and what the provisions are if that is undrivable.
First off, we have that as part of our plan. Within 12 hours, we have to have an engineer come and examine the causeway. Once the storm goes through, we can't just assume that it's safe. We'll have an engineer come and examine the causeway and determine whether we can transit the causeway. If we can't, we have standby plans to start transporting our emergency response vehicles back over by barge. Now, that would be considerably more complex. There's no doubt about it. But we understand that concern. We have it addressed as best we can. We don't know what Mother Nature will do to the storm. There's been storms in the past. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan wiped out the I-10 bridge going into Pensacola. So it is a possibility. We'll wait. When the storm comes through, we'll assess the problem, and we'll move forward with our plans from there.
Whose jurisdiction is it, though?
It's the county's jurisdiction. All bridges in Lee County are county bridges.
You'll be
No
pleased
municipal.
to know that I work real closely with the city manager, with Lieutenant Dalton, with Tallahassee. It is a major priority to get the bridges, particularly the Sanibel Bridge, open because it's the only way on the island. Nobody gets across that bridge until an engineer tells me it's safe. When an engineer says it's safe, but we're not going to have anybody, we're not going to take any chances. You had a question?
Dan Burks, Blue Crab Court. We were with you in 2004. We thought you did an exceptionally good job from our perspective up north of getting the island back in service. But there were two questions that I want to ask pertaining to that experience. The first is, can you comment on the reporting relationship between you and the deployment of Armed National Guard, exactly how that works and what the reporting relationship is once they've been deployed? And number two, and more personally, those of us that were observing from 1,000 miles away were pleased to have local news organizations doing overflights daily. We found we could hit their websites and find out whether there were still roofs on our homes. And that was very beneficial to the anxiety that was obviously provoked by watching this thing. Is there any plan to continue that type of activity? Or, I mean, roughly, my understanding is about 40,000 island residents are snowbirds. So the majority of the property here is owned by people that don't live on the island on a continuing basis. In fact, during the hurricane season, they are gone. I thought that was an exceptionally good public service, and I was hoping that you would supplement it if we had the unfortunate experience of another hurricane.
Okay, we'll get back to the first question. Did you say what is the reporting relationship of the National Guard to us?
Okay, the National Guard works for the attorney or for the Adjutant General. The National Guard answers to the governor. They're deployed at the direction of the governor at the request of the Board of County Commissioners, who, in consultation with the 6 independent municipalities, will make that request. They're down here under a military command, but they're under Title 32. I can go into details later if you want me to. Title 32 means that they're working for the governor, not the federal government. And they're under the command of their National Guard leadership, but they answer via the Adjutant General, the TAG, to the governor. The National Guard has a representative that sits in the operations center, in the Situation Room, the picture you saw with 105 seats. They actually sit directly in front of me, the National Guard representative. And that is a person that is designated by the Adjutant General to sit in my EOC and to be our communications back and forth. The Emergency Operations Center is in communication throughout the county, all the municipalities, every entity, you name an entity in the county, and we're in communication with them. And then we are the focal point to represent the county to the governor at the State Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee.
To further explain what Jim was saying, after Charley, we had the National Guard come out here and help us. They were one of many agencies that helped us. So when they came out, basically came out with, I think it was 20 guardsmen, 10 worked the night shift and 10 worked the day shift. We took maybe 2 or 3 of them guardsmen and put them with a team of officers, and they did various different tasks. They searched houses, they helped us, assisted us answering calls, and they were great. They were very professional. It was either a lieutenant or a captain came up to me as a sergeant at the time, said, "We're here to help. Don't worry about rank, just tell us what you need to have done. We'll have a gallon, all we need all day is a gallon of water, and we'll get to it." And they just pitched in and helped with us. We had no problems as far as jurisdiction or rank or any of that stuff. They were great. They pitched in it, and they worked hard.
And I'll tell you, in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Dave and I have talked about this, I was there with the Coast Guard, actually. The police force in Biloxi, Mississippi was primarily the Charleston, South Carolina Police Department. Again, a long story, but there's a thing called the Emergency Mutual Aid Compact, the EMAC. All 50 governors and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands have signed this thing, and basically it empowers each to help the other with whatever they need. Law enforcement, ambulances, firefighters, anything. It's really an amazing thing. If you have a few hours and you're bored, just type in EMAC on Google, and it'll keep you busy. You had a question?
Referred to a CBS house. I don't know.
Oh, concrete blocks and stucco. One of those 2,000 Michigan homes that you have one, and I have one, and he has one, and yeah.
Sir in the back, did you have a question? Yeah.
No dumb questions, folks.
Ma'am?
I thought last year that you said on the way out over the causeway that you'd have a dumpster available.
Yes, we will. That's a standard procedure. We'll do that year to year. That's one of the lessons we learned. We learned that after Charley, and then the following year when Wilma came, we didn't issue a mandatory evacuation for Wilma, but we did put the dumpster out for folks who were going to evacuate. We'll do that again.
And then this is the question about turning off the water to the house. Someone also told me to turn off the water to the hot water heater. Is that, anybody know on that one?
Harold, do you want to take that one? Our building official would be best to answer that.
Every home that you have has a main water cutoff on your house. If you cut that off, that cuts off everything, water heater and all inside the house, so you won't have a problem.
Could I follow up the water question of the shutoff? At the street, is that the one that's in the booklet you gave out called the emergency water shutoff? It's the one on the street, not the main valve right at the side of your house?
You can do it at either spot. It's much more convenient to do it at the main valve right by your house.
Is that the
If you
preferred
had
way,
any-
or is it the preferred way to do it at the street?
Harold, do you want to take that one?
You can do it either way. If you can get to your meter and you can cut off that valve at the meter at the street, that probably would be better for you. If one of the trees in your yard rolls over and pulls your water line up, you may have a large amount of water come out. So it would be better at the meter, but the water itself will be down because it will have no power from the water lines. So you won't have any pressure anyway. But it's just a safeguard. When they do turn it back on, you may have a fountain if you've got.
That's right. The valve on the street, most people who have an irrigation system, the irrigation system is upstream toward the street of the house main, so you can turn off the house main and still have the irrigation work and so on.
Right, you can. There's 3 or 4 different valves on our houses. We're kind of unique here with a lot of different valves. But the main one at the street would be preferable. A lot of times you can't even get them. I lived in a house, you couldn't even find it. It was under the grass. So.
I have a question here. You guys mentioned Charley a few times. How many times have you had to issue evacuation from the island? And just generally speaking, how has it gone?
I might need some help. Chief, I know Charley was a mandatory, and prior to that, how many did we issue?
I think in the last 30 years, Charley was mandatory. We'd recommended during Wilma, and there was one previous in the last 30 years. So three evacuations in 30 years.
That's why I say you don't need to be afraid to live here. It doesn't happen very often.
It went very well. We have a very high compliance rate with evacuating. We have over a 95% compliance rate with evacuation. And then after Charley, when we came back on, I think in a period of time after encountering folks, there was probably 150 to maybe 200 people out of 5,000 to 6,000 full-time residents who stayed. And I never spoke to a single one of them that didn't say, that every one of them said that next time they were leaving, they were scared to death.
The bridge closes when the winds get to be what?
Good question. We tell people to stay off the bridges when sustained wind is 40 miles an hour. And we also, and this is something that's important to know, we shut down the county, and the municipalities have a similar rule. We shut down all ambulances, all police, all sheriff's deputies, all fire engines, shut down at 40 miles an hour. We put them in a shelter because we don't want them out there having floor joists coming through the windshield. We say the bridge is closed because it's not safe to cross. There's nobody out there telling you not to cross. We don't put barricades up because they would become missiles. We just tell folks it's above 40 miles an hour, don't go on the bridges.
You've been on the bridge even less than that.
Oh, I know. You don't want to be on it.
If you have a family member with special needs, okay, and other family members that don't have special needs, does the family stay together at the special needs center, or is it just for the special needs person in your family?
Actually, it's for the special needs person and preferably one, certainly no more than two caregivers.
That's fair.
Because we don't have space.
Okay, so it'd be one other in addition.
But the other family members can be nearby.
Yeah, right.
Or, if they're really interested, they can sign up and be shelter volunteers, and I'll put them to work.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. Anybody wants to be a volunteer, I'm happy to have you. He gets first crack at you for his CERT team, but on my website, I love volunteers. I have 10 people for $660,000. I love volunteers.
We have a question.
Ma'am?
Was there a problem with boaters coming after the hurricane? I mean, and how did you control that?
I didn't hear you, ma'am. Could you say that again?
Was there a problem with people coming by boat?
We did have some problems. Most people complied. We were able to intercept some. We had our Marine officers out, but we did have some people come by boat. We did have one guy who leased or rented a small helicopter and flew out to West Gulf Drive and checked on his property, but when he was satisfied everything was okay, he got back in and flew back to Fort Myers. So we had many other things to do, so we focused our efforts on that. Once we were certain that he wasn't up to, anything bad, we let him check his property and he flew back. It wasn't our goal to keep people off the island. It was our goal to get the streets cleaned as quick as possible so we could get people back on. It was just such a massive task that we had like timber and land clearing type equipment operating in the center of Periwinkle Way. It would just be unsafe for vehicles to be in the same arena, so to speak.
Mine is actually a statement. For those of us who were here during Charley, we learned a lot of lessons, but I can never, every year I try and say something about the extremely wonderful job that all the emergency services did for everybody on the island and kept everybody safe. And so I just applaud you all, thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you for that. And with that, I'd like to just take a minute to recognize our staff that's helped us throughout the year. Sarah is here and Sherry is here. And Lance Henninger has issued the hurricane passes for about 4 years now. And in that, we just issued a new series also in 2016. So Lance has literally issued about 9,000 or 10,000 passes. So we'd like to say thanks to him. One other thing, this might get me in trouble, but the chief is here, Bill Tomlinson. He's scheduled to retire in the fall sometime. That'd be 30 full years of law enforcement experience, and he was knee-deep in every problem during Charley. He was the incident commander, did an excellent job. He was an excellent leader to work for and provided excellent support to us in the field. So I think it would be only appropriate to give him a round of applause. And having lived that, he's been a good mentor for me in emergency management, as well as plays an excellent support role for us because he knows all too well the problems that we could have. So, are there any other questions? Well, let's hope to have a nice quiet season, and this will be our only discussion on hurricanes. Thank you very much.